I cut my truck off 2 miles below the old switchback and let it roll the last stretch, tires crunching slow over frozen gravel. No headlights, no dash glow. The key stayed in my pocket, warm against my thigh, while the engine ticked itself quiet. Above me, the timberline ridge sat dark against a sky full of hard stars. Below it, the trees started again, thick and messy, the way a mountain wants it. This was where my shelter lived, not on the postcard peaks, not out in open rock where a drone or a desperate hiker could spot a straight line. I built it under the cover that hides everything: fur, fallen limbs, moss, snow, time. I grabbed my pack, checked the straps without thinking, and listened. No engines, no voices, just wind moving through needles and the far-off hiss of the creek that cut through the drainage. I shut the truck door with my palm pressed flat, controlling the sound, then walked into the trees without a flashlight, using the faint starlight and memory. I had done this walk 100 times while the world still pretended the sickness was contained, while city officials stood behind microphones and said the right words, while people stocked up on toilet paper and tried to laugh it off online. My shelter existed during all of that, growing one shovel of dirt at a time, one careful board at a time, always shaped around one rule: never announce itself. The shelter sat below the alpine line, where the trees still had height and the ground still held enough soil to work with. You can't dig up high without hitting rock and leaving scars. Down here, you can cut into a bank, build into it, and put the mountain back on top when you finish. I picked a slope with a natural bend, a thick stand of firs, and a spill of boulders that already looked random. Nothing I did would introduce a straight edge the woods did not already have. I moved with my hands out, fingers brushing trunks, stepping where the ground felt firm. The path was not a path. I had refused to let it become one. If I ever started wearing a track into the forest floor, the whole project would turn into a neon sign for anyone hunting for hidden food. The entrance was a low slot behind a cluster of deadfall. From 5 feet away, it read as shadow and rot and branches. From 10 feet away, it did not exist. I dropped to one knee, lifted a specific limb by the thicker end, slid it aside, and found the seam where bark met a panel I had carved and stained and roughened until it matched the rest of the mess. My fingers found the recessed handle. No metal on the outside, no shine. I pulled, and the panel moved with a muffled scrape against packed leaves. Cold air spilled out, carrying the dry smell of earth and plywood and stored food. I slipped in feet first, dragged my pack after me, and pulled the panel shut until it seated into the frame. Inside, the darkness felt complete for a second. Then my eyes adjusted enough to see the faint outline of the main corridor. I did not use a light right away. I stood still, listening for anything that followed me in. Nothing did. I turned the inner latch, a simple wooden cam that pressed the panel into a foam gasket. Then I moved deeper and closed the second barrier, the real door, a thicker slab of plywood backed with rigid insulation and a layer of rubber. It sealed sound. It sealed smell. It sealed the small drafts that can give you away in winter when warm air wants out. Only then did I click on the smallest headlamp I owned, set to the lowest setting, aimed down. The beam stayed tight, a pale circle on the floor. I stepped around the first shelf of supplies and set my pack on the bench. The shelter was not a bunker fantasy. No steel vault door, no bright monitors, no hum that makes people feel safe. It was a shallow, low-profile, dug-in space with a packed dirt ceiling reinforced by logs, then boards, then a waterproof membrane, then soil and roots and whatever the forest wanted to spread across it. From the inside, it looked simple and tight. A narrow corridor, a sleeping platform, 2 storage bays, a little workbench, and a back crawl that led to a service hatch I used only when I had to. The real work was hidden in the systems that kept me alive without leaving a signature. Air came in through 2 intake lines made from matte black pipe I had buried and routed under roots, then vented into a dead stump 30 yards uphill. I drilled into the stump from below, lined the hole with bark and dirt, and let the inlet look like another animal burrow. Air went out through a separate line that ended under a rock pile in a spot where wind always cut through. The exhaust air mixed and dispersed without a warm plume rising straight up from one point. I did not run fans non-stop. Fans make noise, fans draw power, fans give a pattern. I ran them in short pulses, controlled by a cheap timer and a manual override, and I used a carbon filter box I built from layered mesh and crushed charcoal to kill cooking smells. It did not make the shelter invisible. It made the shelter harder to notice. Heat came from my body, from a small candle heater used in short bursts, and from the insulation. I avoided anything that vented combustion to the outside. No wood stove, no smoke, no exhaust pipe that a kid could follow with his eyes. Water came from the creek, carried in at night in collapsible bladders, filtered and treated, then stored. Waste went into sealed containers with a dry medium, then out to a buried cache site far from the shelter, handled during storms when tracks erased quickly. I had built the place for quiet survival, not comfort. That quiet had a cost. It demanded constant attention. Anything neglected became a problem that made noise later. That night, I unpacked the last load from my truck. 2 bags of rice, a case of canned beans, a roll of heavy plastic, and a small box of spare filters. I stacked everything in the storage bay, then sat on the bench with my back against the wall and took out the hand crank radio. I turned the volume knob 1 click above nothing and pressed the earbud into my right ear. The battery meter read half. I did not care about half. Half meant more time to hear what I needed. The first station I hit was local, the one that used to play classic rock and morning jokes. It carried a looping emergency message now, recorded by a calm voice that sounded tired from repeating itself. The message mentioned highly contagious infection, avoid travel, stay indoors, limit contact. It still used clean words, the kind that keep people from panicking. It said the county was under temporary movement restrictions. It said resources were being allocated. I switched bands and found a regional talk station. The host was gone. A different voice read numbers, then stumbled, then restarted the same sentence. You could hear paper moving. You could hear someone breathing near the microphone, close enough to catch it, then pulling back. I listened for a half hour, switching between stations, piecing together the same story from different angles. The outbreak had jumped again. The valley towns had seen incidents. Hospitals were overwhelmed. A highway closure had caused congestion. There were reports of aggression. A shelter-in-place order was being considered. No one said the word zombie. No one said reanimation. No one said dead. No one wanted to say anything that would break the last thin layer of normal. I shut the radio off and sat in the dark with the headlamp off, hearing the shelter settle in tiny creaks. I had spent months thinking I would feel relief the moment I stopped being visible. I had told myself that cutting off the surface would simplify life into clear math: calories, water, air, sleep, maintenance. Instead, I found myself listening for every sound outside, trying to read a whole world through the filter of dirt and wood. I slept in short chunks, not because of fear in my body, because my mind kept checking systems the way a hand checks a pocket for keys. Every time the wind shifted, I imagined the intake stump drawing in smoke from a campfire. Every time a branch scraped another branch, I imagined a boot scuffing leaves near the entrance. Near dawn, I woke and sat up, hand on the wall, listening. Something moved outside. Slow, not wind, not a squirrel. Footsteps on dry needles. I swung my legs off the sleeping platform without turning on a light. I stepped to the workbench, opened the top drawer, and pulled out the short periscope tube I had built from PVC and 2 angled mirrors. It was crude. It worked. I crawled into the back passage, knees in dirt, shoulders brushing wood, then eased the service hatch open the width of 2 fingers. Cold air slid in. I lifted the periscope into place, careful not to bump the hatch. The view showed forest floor, the underside of ferns, a tangle of dead needles. Then boots stepped into frame. Hiking boots. Muddy. The person paused close enough that I could see a frayed lace end swinging. A second pair of boots stepped in, then a third. People, not just one. I held the periscope still. The boots shifted. A voice murmured above me, muffled by soil and wood. I could not make out words, only tone. Someone sounded irritated. Someone else sounded exhausted. A metal object clinked. A canteen cap. A buckle. Then one of the boots scuffed, grinding grit into the ground. The person moved closer, and the shadow fell across the hatch area. The person stopped and stood still. The periscope view filled with pant leg and the edge of a jacket. The person leaned down. I could not see a face from my angle. I could see a hand reach toward the deadfall covering my entrance, fingers testing branches. My throat stayed closed. My hand tightened on the periscope tube, then relaxed, then tightened again. I stopped moving entirely, not even shifting my knees because any scrape inside the passage would carry through the hatch gap. The hand lifted one branch, then set it back. The person did it again, slower. Another voice whispered something, sharper this time. The person's hand withdrew. Boots backed away. Leaves crunched. The group moved down slope, voices fading into the trees. I waited long after the last sound died. Then I lowered the periscope, closed the hatch, and crawled back into the main chamber. That was the first time someone walked within arm's reach of my shelter after the epidemic turned real. It would not be the last. I spent the morning checking everything, not in a panic, in a sequence. Intake pulse test, exhaust pulse test, condensation wipe on the cold wall, food bay inventory glance, water filter backflush, battery pack meter check, all routine. Then I started changing the camouflage. If one group had noticed something off, it meant the forest was getting busier. A hidden shelter does not stay hidden by staying still. It stays hidden by blending with whatever the environment becomes. New traffic meant new eyes. New eyes meant my entrance needed to look even more ordinary. I waited until late afternoon, when light dropped under the canopy. Then I slipped out through the service hatch, not the main entrance, and crawled into the brush 20 yards away. I moved low, using the same route I always used to avoid creating a path. The air outside smelled clean, cold, and sharp. Somewhere far down in the valley, a faint smear of smoke hung in the sky. Not a campfire, something bigger. I took a small folding saw from my belt and cut 2 dead branches from a fallen fir, then dragged them to the entrance cover. I added them in a messy cross pattern, making the deadfall look heavier and older. I scattered fresh needles I collected from another area, then rubbed soil into my gloves and pressed it into the bark of the panel seam. I moved slowly, stopping every few minutes to listen. No voices, No footsteps, only wind. When I finished, I backed away and looked at the spot from different angles. It looked wrong to me because I knew it existed. From 15 feet away, it looked like rot and mess. From 30, it vanished into the clutter. I crawled back inside through the service hatch and sealed it. That night, I listened to the radio again. The local stations had changed. Some were dead. Some carried static. One carried a man talking in short bursts, not a broadcaster, just someone who found a microphone. He said there were groups on the roads, and don't stop, and don't let anyone in. He said the state patrol had abandoned checkpoints. He said the hospitals were lost. He kept repeating one sentence every few minutes, word for word, as if repetition could make it true. Stay away from the bite cases. I sat on the bench, radio in one hand, the other hand resting on my knee, staring at the wall. In the morning, the first real wave came through. I heard it before I saw anything. Voices, many of them, drifting between trunks. A child cried. A man snapped at the child. Someone else told him to shut up. Footsteps pressed through needles and snapped twigs. Not careful, not quiet. People moving on adrenaline and exhaustion do not move like hikers. I killed the fans and sat still on the sleeping platform, listening. The shelter had enough air for hours without a pulse. The carbon filter box would hold smells. The only thing that could betray me now was noise I made myself. The group moved overhead, close. I heard a pack hit the ground. I heard someone spit. I heard a zipper drag open. I heard the crack of a protein bar wrapper, then a muttered argument. The argument sharpened. A woman spoke, low and controlled. A man answered, loud enough that it carried through dirt and wood. The man sounded young, wired. He said something about not stopping. He said something about not camping in the trees. Someone else answered him, older, firm. The older voice used his name once. I caught it because it was a clean sound. Brandon. The older voice told Brandon to sit down and eat. Brandon laughed once, not a happy laugh. Brandon said someone was going to sneak up on them. Brandon said the woods were full of people. I pressed my palm flat against the wall and let it rest there, feeling the tiny vibration of footsteps shifting above. The group stayed for maybe 20 minutes, long enough to drink water, long enough to adjust packs, long enough for someone to step off into the brush to relieve himself, long enough for that person to choose a spot close to the deadfall near my entrance. I heard the person moving through brush. Close. I heard fabric shifting, then a steady stream hitting soil. The smell came next, faint, sliding into the shelter through whatever microscopic gap exists in every imperfect seal. My fingers found the inner latch without looking. I tightened it another notch, compressing the gasket. Then I reached for the roll of duct tape I kept beside the door and tore off a strip, pressing it along the seam in one quick motion, not neat, just sealed. Above me, the person finished and moved away. The group gathered again, voices rising, then fading as they continued along the corridor of trees. I did not move for another hour. When I finally turned the fans back on, I did it on the lowest pulse. After that day, the forest corridor became a route. Some groups passed fast, heads down, packs tight, no talking. Some moved slow, stopping often, arguing, crying. A few had shopping carts with one wheel locked, dragged over roots until the cart flipped and someone screamed at it. I learned the rhythms through sound. The early groups moved with urgency and some structure, still thinking in terms of destinations and plans. Later groups moved with hunger and confusion, stopping at odd times, talking too loud. sometimes laughing in a way that made no sense with the rest of the sounds. On the fourth day, I heard gunshots in the valley. Not close, but sharp enough to count. 3 shots, then a pause, then 5 more, then nothing. That night, a helicopter passed over the ridge, low, moving slow, then circling. The thump of blades carried through the ground even after it moved away. I lay on the sleeping platform staring into the dark, hearing it return twice, then vanish toward the east. In the morning, ash drifted down in tiny flakes. Not a heavy fall, just enough to catch on branches and melt into dark spots. Something was burning somewhere down there. I had told myself I would not intervene. The plan was simple. Stay hidden, stay quiet. Outlast the worst weeks. Let the fever burn through the crowded places. Let the desperate people thin out. Then decide what existed afterward. The plan did not include listening to families walk past my head, children coughing, adults whispering prayers, all of them unaware there was food and water and quiet under their boots. On the 7th day, one group came close enough that I heard a woman's voice crack when she tried to keep it steady. She was talking to a kid, telling him to drink water in small sips. The kid complained. The woman repeated herself, slower, patient even through exhaustion. A man answered her, frustrated. He told her the kid needed to stop talking. He told her the kid needed to walk. The woman said the kid's shoes were soaked. The man said everyone's shoes were soaked. Then the kid stumbled, and a small body hit the ground. The sound was soft and heavy at the same time. The woman cursed under her breath. Not loud, not dramatic. She just said one bad word and then started coaxing the kid up again. The man snapped at her. Another adult told the man to back off. They stayed near the entrance deadfall. I could tell because their footsteps shifted in a tight area, and the voices sounded directly overhead, the way sound changes when people stop moving and start facing each other. I sat on the bench, hands clasped, staring at the supplies stacked neatly on shelves. I could picture the kid's soaked shoes without seeing them. I could picture the woman trying to keep the kid going because there was no other choice. My mind offered solutions in fast clips. Open the panel, slide out a bottle of water, whisper directions, tell them to keep moving, give them socks, give them a candy bar for the kid, then seal up again. Then my mind offered the other clip. The group sees the entrance. The group pushes in. Someone demands more. Someone brings others. The shelter becomes a camp. A camp becomes a problem. A problem becomes a death sentence. I stayed still. I waited for them to move on. When they finally did, I waited another hour, then crawled into the back passage and slipped out through the service hatch. It was late afternoon, cloud cover thick, light flat and gray. I moved uphill through brush, taking a wide loop so I would not cross the group's trail. I found a spot near the corridor where a fallen log created a shallow pocket. I placed 2 sealed bottles of water there and a small bag with socks and a pair of cheap gloves, then covered it with loose needles in a way that still let it be found. I did not leave a note. Notes create evidence. Evidence creates questions. Questions create searching. I watched from behind a trunk for 20 minutes, staying far enough that no one would see me if the group came back. The group did not come back. The corridor stayed quiet. I returned to the shelter and sealed the hatch. That was my compromise. I would not intervene face to face. I would not become part of anyone's story. I would not let my shelter become a landmark. But I also could not sit under the mountain and listen to children suffer without doing anything at all. Over the next 2 weeks, I created 3 cache spots along different angles of the corridor, all of them away from my shelter. I rotated them. I left small amounts: water, basic food, socks, a cheap poncho, a packet of fever reducers once, sealed and dry. I never left enough to encourage camping, just enough to keep someone moving. The epidemic shifted outside. I could hear it in the sounds that reached me. At first, it was mostly people. Then it became fewer people, more silence and occasional bursts of chaos. Shouting, running footsteps, 1 or 2 shots, then long stretches of nothing. On the 18th day, I heard something else in the woods. Not a person voice, not an animal. It was a wet, uneven sound, a dragging step followed by a soft grunt, repeated, slow, wandering. I was outside during a light snow, collecting water in the creek with a collapsible bladder, keeping my footprints in the stream bed to avoid leaving a clear track. I froze in place, bladder half full, listening. The dragging sound moved through brush uphill, maybe 40 yards away. A branch cracked under weight. Then the grunt again, low, empty. I slid the bladder into my pack, cinched it tight, and moved downstream, staying in the water, using the sound of the creek to mask my own movement. I kept my head angled toward the noise, tracking it, letting it pass. Through the trees, I saw a shape between trunks. A person, upright, moving wrong. The person's arms hung too loose. The person's head dipped forward. The person shuffled without scanning the woods, without reacting to cold. I did not study it. I did not need details. The movement told me enough. This was not a refugee. This was not a lost hiker. I backed away, using the creek bend as cover, then turned and moved fast back toward the shelter through a route that avoided the corridor. Inside, I sealed the hatch and sat on the bench, hands on my knees, listening to the forest through layers of dirt. For the first time since I went underground, I understood that the woods would not stay clean just because the towns were falling apart. Whatever the sickness was doing to people down there, it could wander up here too. The mountain did not care. The trees did not care. The corridor would become a feeding lane if enough of those wandering things drifted into it. And that changed my routine. I stopped leaving caches near the corridor for a while. A cache draws people. People draw noise. Noise draws everything else. Instead, I focused on hardening my own invisibility. I tightened the seal on the main entrance again. I adjusted the intake pulse schedule to run only at times when wind was highest, using a strip of survey tape outside near the stump to read wind movement through the periscope view. I added another layer of charcoal to the filter box. I moved stored food away from the entrance wall because rodents love warmth and smell, and a scratching mouse is louder than it should be in a silent shelter. I also started setting simple early warning indicators outside, far from the shelter, in places where only someone moving off the main corridor would trip them. A thin line of fishing filament tied low between 2 saplings, connected to a small bell I hung inside a hollow log. A flat rock balanced on another rock in a way that looked natural until it fell. Nothing that screamed trap. Just little clues that something had moved through a space that usually stayed empty. On the 21st day, one of those indicators triggered. I was inside, cleaning a water filter, when I heard a faint clink outside. Far, soft, then another clink, then nothing. I killed the fans and moved to the back passage. I eased the service hatch open enough to use the periscope again. The view showed a hillside through branches, then a pair of legs stepping over the filament line area. The legs moved slow, the feet dragged, the person's pants were torn at the knee. The person did not react to the filament at all. The bell outside kept a faint tremble, not a ring, just a tiny shake from the filament moving in wind. The figure moved out of view. I held the periscope still, waiting for it to reappear. It did, closer now, drifting down slope toward the corridor. It passed within sight for maybe 10 seconds. I caught a glimpse of the face, not close enough for details, close enough to see slack mouth and unfocused eyes. The person's skin looked gray in the flat light. The person's hands hung open. The figure wandered on, vanishing behind trunks. I shut the hatch and sat back in the main chamber. I did not move for a long time. Not frozen, just thinking through options one by one, because the shelter was only hidden if the area around it stayed low traffic. A wandering infected could drift right over the entrance, stop, and stand there for hours, making noise that pulled other infected in. Or a refugee could run from one and crash into my deadfall cover without even knowing it. I needed the corridor to stay predictable. Predictable meant fewer surprises. Fewer surprises meant I had to shape traffic without revealing myself. That night, I went out. I waited until the wind picked up and snow started again, a thin, dry fall that erased small prints within an hour. I dressed in dark layers, covered my face with a gaiter, and carried only what I needed: a small hatchet, a roll of filament, a headlamp with a red lens I would use only pointed down, and a bag of scent-neutral lime. I moved through the trees using the creek again, stepping in water where I could, then climbing out only where roots hid the bank. I followed the corridor route at a distance, staying parallel, listening. In the distance, I heard a shout, then silence, then something that sounded like running feet. I stayed low and waited. The running moved away. I found the infected trail where it crossed a patch of soft soil. The prints were uneven, scuffed, drifting. I followed them until they reached a small clearing where the ground dropped into a shallow gully. The infected had stumbled there, slid down, then climbed out on the other side, leaving deep marks. That gully gave me an idea. I spent the next 2 hours building a quiet diversion. I did not dig a pit. That would leave fresh earth. Fresh earth is a sign. Instead, I used the existing gully and made it more of a trap for wandering feet. I pulled dead branches down across the easiest crossing points, laid them in a messy tangle, then wired a few to shift under weight. Not sharp, not meant to injure, meant to slow, meant to force someone to step off balance and tumble into the gully, then climb out somewhere else, away from my shelter's side of the corridor. I also set up a noise lure, simple. A loose strip of metal I found near an old illegal campsite, hung inside a hollow branch so the wind could tap it faintly. It was not loud. It was just enough to draw wandering attention away from the corridor's deeper woods and toward a less useful direction. When I finished, I scattered needles over any spots where my boots had disturbed the ground and rubbed snow into the deeper prints to blur their edges. Then I moved out, circling wide back to the shelter. The next day, a refugee group passed through and did not stop near my entrance. That alone felt like a win. Days blurred into weeks, but not in a quiet, sleepy way. Every day had tasks that kept the shelter alive and kept me sane. Filter maintenance, ration planning, drying damp clothing near the candle heater in short bursts, checking for condensation mold, tightening lashings on the log supports, cleaning the intake screens for pine needles. Every few days, I had to go outside for water. Creek water in winter stays moving under ice, but the edges freeze. I learned to break the same spot carefully, then cover it again with loose ice fragments so it did not look worked. I carried water in bladders under my jacket to keep it from freezing solid on the walk back. I also checked my warning indicators. 2 more times, I found signs of infected wandering near the corridor. Once, I saw 2 of them together through the periscope, drifting in no pattern, bumping into branches, then separating. I never engaged. I never got close. Not because I thought I could not handle one, because handling one makes noise. Noise brings more. Noise brings people. People bring questions. Questions point toward the one hidden thing worth finding: stored food. On the 32nd day, the biggest test arrived. It started with voices overhead, multiple adults, then the scrape of something heavy dragged across the ground. A sled, a plastic tote, something that made a steady rasp through needles. The group stopped almost directly on top of me. I could hear the weight settle. Someone exhaled in a long, tired breath. Someone else dropped a pack with a thud. A man started talking, louder than he should have. He sounded energetic in a way that didn't match the situation. He said they should post up here. He said the trees were thick, good cover. He said the ridge above would block wind. He said anyone chasing them would miss them. A woman answered him hard. She said they were not camping here. She said they were moving again before dark. The man argued. He said he was done walking. He said the kid needed rest. He said he saw smoke back down the valley, and he was not walking toward smoke. Another man older tried to calm him down. The older man spoke in short sentences, controlled. He told the loud man to keep his voice down. He told him to drink water. He told him to sit. The loud man did not sit. His boots paced, scraping back and forth. He said he heard something under the ground. He said he felt it. He said he was not stupid. That sentence made my stomach feel hollow, not from fear, from recognition. People under stress invent patterns. They fill silence with threat, because threat gives the brain something to solve. The loud man started kicking at deadfall. Not my deadfall exactly, but close. He was testing brush, stomping, trying to provoke an answer. The woman told him to stop. He kicked again. I sat on the sleeping platform, not moving, counting seconds between his kicks, tracking distance by sound. He was close enough that one hard stomp on the entrance panel would change everything. I needed him to stop without revealing the shelter. I crawled into the back passage in total darkness, feeling the dirt under my palms, moving slow so my knees would not scrape wood. I reached the service hatch and opened it a finger width, just enough to slide out a thin filament line attached to a small twig bundle. This was a trick I had practiced. The twig bundle, if pulled, would shift a set of branches downhill from the shelter, creating a crack and a slide of needles that sounded like movement. Not human speech, not a door, just movement. I fed the filament out and guided it along a groove under the hatch edge, then pulled, steady. Outside, 20 yards downslope, the twig bundle snapped free. A cluster of branches shifted. Dry needles slid and spilled with a sudden rustle. The loud man stopped kicking. Voices changed tone instantly. Someone whispered. Someone hissed at the kid to stay quiet. The loud man said, very quietly now, "See?" The woman told him to shut up. The older man told everyone to move now. Packs lifted. The dragged objects scraped again. The group moved off, not down the corridor, but angled away toward the ridge, trying to avoid whatever they imagined in the brush. I stayed in the back passage for a long time, filament still in my hand, listening until the last scrape faded. When I finally crawled back into the main chamber and sealed the hatch, my hands were shaking in a way I could see in the headlamp glow when I turned it on low. I pressed my palms flat on my thighs until they steadied. That moment made something clear. I could stay hidden from casual traffic. I could even stay hidden from most desperate people. But all it took was one loud, paranoid person with time and a need to feel in control. And my shelter could be discovered without any careful search. If that happened, the shelter would not stay mine. I needed a new layer of defense that did not involve confronting anyone. Over the next week, I shifted the corridor itself, not by moving trees or making obvious barriers, by making the area around my shelter subtly unpleasant to camp in. I collected deadfall and moved it into a wider scatter near the entrance zone, making the ground harder to sit on, harder to drag a sled through. I created slight unevenness that made the spot feel awkward. I did not create a wall. I created discomfort. I also used scent. Not strong, not chemical. I sprinkled a thin line of lime in a couple of shallow spots where people tended to step off trail to relieve themselves. Lime has a clean, sharp smell. It suggests something dead nearby. It makes a campsite feel wrong without anyone understanding why. It worked. Groups stopped less often. Snow came heavier in mid-season. The forest quieted under it. Tracks became easier to read and easier to erase. The shelter roof disappeared completely under accumulation. That helped, but it created new work. Snow load presses down. Wet snow becomes heavy. A shallow shelter can fail if you get lazy. Every storm, I checked the internal supports, listening for new creaks, watching for tiny shifts in the seams. I crawled into the back passage and checked for moisture seep. I kept a simple crack gauge made from 2 pencil marks on a board. If the marks drifted apart, it meant movement. Movement meant action. One storm dumped enough snow that my intake stump got partially buried by drift. The air pulse weakened. I could tell because the intake sound changed, thinner, strained. I did not wait. I dressed and went out in the middle of the storm. Outside, wind pushed snow sideways through the trunks. Visibility dropped to a short distance. That helped me. No one camps in that. No one hikes in that on purpose. If someone did, the person would be focused on not freezing and not getting lost, not on noticing a disturbed patch of deadfall. I moved uphill to the stump, using my knees to push through drift, then dug around the base with my gloved hands until I found the inlet hole. Snow had packed tight against it. I cleared it, then used a stick to probe the intake pipe for ice. It was clear. Good. On the way back, I saw a line of prints cutting across the slope. Fresh, not filled by storm yet. I stopped behind a trunk and looked downslope through the snow curtain. 3 figures moved between trees, hunched, pushing through wind. Refugees still moving even in this. One figure lagged behind, smaller. A kid. The kid kept stopping, bending forward, hands on knees, then straightening and stumbling after the adults. The adults did not look back often. One looked back once, waved a hand, and kept moving. I watched them cross the slope above my shelter zone. I watched the kid slip once, catch himself on a trunk, then keep going. My mind started doing the math again. Storm, kid, risk. If the kid fell and could not get up, the kid would be here when the storm cleared, maybe alone. Alone people search for shelter. Searching finds hidden things. I turned and moved fast along a wide arc, staying downhill from their track, then climbed back up ahead of them. I reached one of my old cache spots and pulled the tarp cover aside. The cache was mostly empty now. I kept it that way. I took 1 sealed water bottle and 1 small bag of trail mix from my pack, then placed them in the open where the track would pass close. Not hidden, not buried. Visible enough that a tired adult could spot it without stopping long. Then I moved back into the trees and watched. The first adult spotted the bottle, stopped, and grabbed it with a quick motion. He looked around, eyes scanning, body tense. He did not see me. He called to the others, low. The woman came back, took the trail mix, shoved it into a pocket. The kid reached them, and the woman handed the kid the trail mix without a word. The kid tore it open and ate while walking. The group moved on, faster now, still tense, still in the storm, but moving. I waited until they vanished, then erased my own prints on the way back by stepping in my earlier tracks and dragging a branch behind me in a wide sweep. Inside, I dried my gloves near the candle heater and sat on the sleeping platform, staring at the wall again, feeling the weird weight of helping without being seen. Weeks passed. The radio became mostly dead air. Once in a while, I caught short transmissions on the weather band, not weather, just clipped voices calling coordinates. Then static. I never heard a full explanation. I never heard a plan. What I did hear, more often, were human voices outside fading away over time. The corridor traffic thinned. Either people found other routes, or people ran out of strength, or something else caught them. I had no way to know for sure. In the quieter stretches, the infected presence increased. I saw more wandering figures through the periscope, not daily, but often enough that it became part of the routine. One wandered into the deadfall area once, bumped into branches, then drifted away without touching the panel. Another stopped close and stood still for a long time, head angled down, mouth open, making a faint sound every few seconds. It eventually moved on. I stopped sleeping in long stretches after that. Not from a pounding heart or anything dramatic. I simply could not justify being unconscious for hours when one unpredictable figure could decide to linger and draw attention. I broke my nights into cycles. 2 hours sleep, wake and listen. Intake pulse check. 2 hours sleep, wake and listen. It kept my mind sharper. It also made time feel thick, slow. On day 64, my shelter almost gave itself away because of a mouse. I heard scratching near the food bay at 2 a.m. Not loud, but persistent. I sat up, waited, listened. The scratching continued. I could not ignore it. If the mouse found a way into the main chamber, the mouse would chew something, ruin something, maybe drag bits into a vent. That could create smell. Smell is a beacon. I turned on the headlamp low and moved to the bay. I saw tiny droppings near one corner where a board met dirt. The mouse had found a gap I had missed. I spent the next hour sealing it with a strip of metal mesh and a wad of steel wool, then packed clay into the edges, smoothing it down. I cleaned the droppings with disinfectant wipes, sealed them in a bag, and moved the bag to the waste container. I finished the work, sat back on the bench, and realized I had been making tiny noises for an hour. Quiet noises, but noises. In a world where people searched for any hint of warmth, any hint of stored food, the idea of someone listening above me made my hands work faster and cleaner, not sloppier. After that, I set a trap. Not poison. Poison smells. A simple snap trap baited with a dab of peanut butter, placed in a sealed bucket with a hole cut just big enough for a mouse. The bucket kept the noise contained. It also kept the mouse from dying somewhere inside the wall where I could not retrieve it. The trap caught one the next night. I disposed of it far from the shelter during a storm, then reset. The routine kept going until it broke in a different way. Day 71. Late afternoon, I heard running in the corridor again. Real running, not shuffling, boots pounding, branches whipping, someone crashing through brush without caring. A woman's voice shouted a name. A man's voice shouted back, urgent, strained. A kid screamed once. Then I heard the other sound, multiple uneven shuffles, faster than the earlier infected, not sprinting, but not slow either. The rhythm was wrong. The cadence came in clusters, bumps and stumbles, then a burst. The running humans cut right across my shelter zone, not stopping, not scanning, just fleeing. I killed the fans and moved into the back passage with the periscope. The view outside showed the corridor slope, blurred by falling snow. A woman ran past, hair stuck to her face, a pack bouncing. A man followed, grabbing the kid's arm, half dragging, half pulling. The kid's boots slipped on needles, then caught, then slipped again. Behind them, 3 infected figures appeared between trunks, moving fast enough to close distance. Their heads jerked as they moved. Their arms flailed in a way that looked more animal than human, but I forced myself to keep it literal in my mind. They were humans whose bodies no longer followed normal control. The effect was ugly. The woman and man veered downhill toward the creek. The infected followed. For 10 seconds, the chase moved away from my shelter. Then the kid stumbled hard and went down. The man yanked the kid up, but the kid's legs folded again. The man shouted something I could not make out. The woman turned, grabbed the kid under the arm, and hauled. The infected were close enough now that any noise from this would draw more. Any gunshot from the humans would ring through the corridor. I did the only thing I could do without exposing the shelter. I pulled the filament line for my diversion bundle again, the one that created a loud rustle downslope. Then I pulled a second line, connected to a different bundle farther off, creating another sudden crackle in brush. Outside, the infected heads snapped toward the sound. One veered slightly, another followed. The third hesitated, then changed direction too, drifting toward the louder movement. The humans had a gap now. The man dragged the kid toward the creek. The woman followed, looking back twice. The infected moved toward the diversion, crashing into branches, then stumbling into the gully area I had reinforced earlier. One fell, another followed, tumbling into the drop with a heavy thud. The third circled, then tried to cross and slipped. The sound was loud enough that I winced in the dark passage. Not a physical flinch, a mental one, the knowledge that loud sounds carry. I held the periscope steady, watching until the humans vanished downslope. The infected struggled in the gully, climbing, falling, climbing again. They would get out eventually, but they were delayed. Delayed meant the humans might live another hour. I shut the hatch and crawled back inside, sealing everything. For the next hour, I sat in the dark listening for the sound of those infected drifting back toward my entrance. I heard them far off, then closer, then fading away again, following the corridor toward the creek. When the forest quieted, I turned the fans back on in the smallest pulse and leaned my forehead against the wall, not for comfort, for focus. I needed to remember one thing. I had just shaped the environment again. It worked once. It could also attract attention from a different kind of person. That night, someone came back. Footsteps returned near midnight. One set, slow, careful, scanning, not wandering infected. This was a human moving with intent. I killed the fans. I moved into the back passage with the periscope. The view showed a man crouching near the gully area, examining tracks even under snow. He had a headlamp, but he kept it off most of the time, turning it on in short flashes aimed at the ground. He moved in a circle, studying, then paused and looked upslope toward my shelter zone. He did not walk straight to the entrance. He walked slow and wide, checking trees, checking ground, reading the forest. This was the kind of person I had been afraid of since the beginning. Not loud, not panicked, the kind of person who survives because he observes. He moved closer. He stopped near the deadfall area, not touching it, just looking. He crouched and ran his hand over the needles. He lifted a small clump and let it fall through his fingers. He shifted his weight and scanned again. My mind ran through options fast. Do nothing and hope he leaves. Create a diversion sound again and risk drawing him closer. Use my own voice and risk everything. The man stood and took 2 slow steps toward the deadfall, then stopped. He stared at one particular branch I had added earlier, the thicker one, the one that did not belong exactly where it sat. He reached out and touched it, barely moving it. I did not pull the diversion line. I did something else. I took my small hand crank radio, tuned it to the dead station that produced only static, and turned the volume up. Static filled the shelter, harsh and bright in the enclosed space. It also traveled up through the intake line in a faint whisper, not loud, but present in the stump outlet far uphill. I cranked the radio until it was loud enough that any nearby animal would flinch and run. Then I set it down near the intake duct and let it play. Outside, through the periscope, the man froze. His head turned, not toward the deadfall, but uphill, toward the stump area. He angled his ear, listening. He took a step away from my entrance and started moving uphill, cautious, drawn by the faint suggestion of something not natural. I kept the static running and watched him go. He climbed toward the stump, stopping often, scanning. When he got close to the stump outlet, he crouched and listened again. He reached toward the bark area, then jerked his hand back when a sudden louder burst of static hit, caused by my hand bumping the radio volume knob inside. The man stood and backed away. He did not approach the stump again. He turned and moved off, fast now, leaving the area with urgency. Maybe he thought it was a trap. Maybe he thought it was another human hiding with a radio. Maybe he thought infected were nearby. I did not know. I only knew he left. I killed the radio and sat down on the bench, hands flat on my knees, staring at the floor. I had just used my system against someone. It felt dirty and smart at the same time. I also knew he might return. A cautious man does not forget an odd sound in the woods. He circles back later from a different angle, with more daylight, more patience. So the next day, I changed the stump. In late morning, when light was strongest and snow glare made detail harder, I went out in a wide loop and reached the stump inlet. I dug it out, then blocked it temporarily with a plug of bark and dirt, forcing the intake to draw from the secondary inlet I had hidden under a different dead stump farther away. Then I covered the first stump outlet with a scatter of fresh bark and moss, changing the look enough that the man's memory would not line up cleanly. I also moved my warning indicators again, shifting them, making the forest read different if someone returned to map it. I did all of this while watching the corridor, listening for voices, watching for movement through the trees. That day passed without more visitors. The next week stayed quiet. Fewer refugee groups, more drifting infected. The corridor became less a highway for humans and more a random path for whatever wandered. On day 86, I found the first real sign that the valley towns were gone in the way people mean when they say gone. A dog showed up near my creek water spot. Not a wolf, not a coyote, a dog, medium size, short coat, collar still on but frayed. The dog stood on the far bank watching me, ears up, body thin but not collapsing. The dog did not bark. The dog did not run. The dog just watched, waiting. I froze. Not because of fear, because dogs are alarms. A dog leads people. A dog draws infected. A dog complicates everything. I backed away in the creek, moving slow. The dog followed along the bank at the same pace, head low, eyes fixed on me. I spoke once, soft, not a baby voice, just a calm tone. "Go on." The dog stopped and tilted his head, then took a step closer. I threw a small stick into the brush far away, not to play, to redirect. The dog looked toward the sound, then looked back at me, then trotted toward the brush. I used the moment to move fast back toward the shelter, staying in the creek as long as I could, then climbing out under roots and moving through dense cover. Inside, I sealed everything and listened. I heard nothing for an hour. Then I heard the dog outside near the entrance deadfall, sniffing, stepping, circling. I held still, fans off, breathing shallow through my nose without thinking about it, because any loud inhale in a silent shelter feels huge in your own head. The dog scratched once at the deadfall. Then the dog whined, a low sound that twisted my stomach, because it sounded confused, not aggressive. Then the dog moved away. I did not see him again for 3 days. On the 4th day, I found paw prints near one of my old cache spots. The dog had found it and eaten whatever was left. I hated that. Not because the dog took food, because the dog might start orbiting my area, returning again and again, turning my invisible shelter into a known place in the mind of an animal that could lead people. So I made a choice. I stopped using that cache. I moved it farther away, deeper off the corridor, toward a rocky patch where people rarely walked. I left a small sealed bag of kibble there, then left. The dog found it. I saw it through the periscope the next day, nose deep in the spot, tail low, eating. After that, the dog stayed away from my entrance zone. The dog had a new place to check, far enough that it did not threaten me. Day 90 came with a clear sky and a cold snap. The temperature dropped hard overnight. Inside the shelter, the cold pushed in through every seam. My breath fogged faintly in the headlamp beam. Water in the outer containers formed slush. The intake pipes grew brittle. I ran the candle heater in short bursts, watching the oxygen monitor I kept near the bed, refusing to get lazy with it. That cold snap also changed the infected movement outside. I saw fewer of them. The ones I did see moved slower, stiff, their steps more dragging than usual. That gave me a fragile sense of control. Not safety, control, a small difference. I used that window to do bigger maintenance. I reinforced one of the ceiling supports with a new wedge. I replaced a section of intake screen. I cleaned and dried the carbon filter box, then repacked it with fresh crushed charcoal from my stored bags. During that work, I found a small leak in the membrane seam near the back crawl. A slow seep, not a drip, but enough to dampen soil. If it grew, it would rot wood. Rot becomes collapse. Fixing it required going outside and digging down from above without making a scar. I waited for a day with light snow and wind. Then I went out at dawn, moved to the roof zone using a route that would not create a clear track, and started peeling back snow and loose debris in a wide area, not one clean hole. I used a small folding shovel and my gloved hands, working slow. I found the membrane edge after 2 hours. The seam had lifted where I had folded it under a root. The root had shifted with freeze and thaw. The fold opened a gap. I cleaned it with a rag, dried it with a small hand warmer pack pressed against it, then applied a strip of patch material and adhesive, pressing hard, holding it until it set. Then I layered the soil back on in irregular clumps, replacing roots and moss mats in a way that looked disturbed only to someone who knew what to look for. Halfway through covering it, I heard voices again, close. I flattened instantly, shovel in my hand, face turned into snow and needles, not moving. The voices approached along the corridor. 2 adults. One spoke in a whisper. The other answered in a low tone. I could not see them from my position under the brush mat, but I could hear their boots, the rhythm of their walking. Careful, light, not panicked refugees, not stumbling. They stopped within maybe 20 feet of me. I could hear one of them breathing through his nose, slow, controlled. I could hear fabric shifting as one adjusted a pack strap. One of them said very quietly, "This area feels worked." The other answered, "Everything feels worked now." The first voice said, "No, I mean right here." A boot stepped closer, needles crunched, snow compressed. I stayed flat, eyes open, looking at the underside of moss and the dark line of a root. My hand tightened on the shovel handle, not because I planned to swing it, because holding something kept my mind anchored. The boot stopped. Another boot stopped beside it. Silence stretched. Then, a faint, familiar sound, a dog sniffing. The dog was back, the same collar dog. He had followed someone. The dog sniffed near my work area, then sneezed once, then sniffed again. A human hand patted the dog's side. The first voice murmured the dog's name, soft. I did not catch it clearly, 1 syllable. The dog moved a few steps, sniffed again, then pawed lightly at the snow. Not digging, just testing. My brain flipped through worst-case images fast. The dog digs, the human sees membrane, the human calls the other. Both start peeling back the roof. I needed the dog away. I did not have the luxury of moving without being seen. I reached into my pocket, slow, not lifting my body, just sliding fingers. I found a small strip of jerky I kept for emergencies on long outside work. I pinched it, then flicked it out through the brush, sending it in a low arc away from the roof zone. It landed with a soft thump. The dog's head snapped toward it. The dog trotted to the spot and ate it fast. The first voice chuckled once, quiet. The first voice said, "He is always hungry." The second voice said, "Keep him close." The boots shifted. The humans moved away, dog following, voices fading down the corridor. I stayed flat for a long time after that, letting the cold seep into my elbows, not caring, only listening until the last sound vanished. Then I finished covering the membrane with frantic patience, forcing my hands to move slow even when my mind wanted speed. Speed makes mistakes. Mistakes make signs. When I finally returned inside, I sealed the shelter and sat on the bench with my headlamp off, letting darkness settle over me again. I realized something uncomfortable and simple. I had built a shelter designed to disappear, but the world above was changing into a place where careful people and hungry dogs would search every inch of forest for warmth, food, and shelter. Invisibility did not mean untouched forever. It meant delayed. So I started planning for the day I would have to leave. Not because I wanted to, because staying forever would eventually end with someone finding the one wrong branch, the one disturbed patch of snow, the one odd smell. I began packaging my supplies into move-ready bundles. Not everything, just the essentials, Food dense enough to carry, water treatment, spare socks, a small medical kit, a compact sleeping bag, tools that mattered. I made a grab pack that could be lifted and moved in under a minute. I also started scouting a second hide spot farther uphill, closer to rock, where the ground was harder to dig, but the line of travel was less. Not a second shelter built from scratch. A temporary crawl under a boulder pile where I could wait if someone breached the main entrance. I dug that crawl in short sessions during storms, taking dirt out in small bags and scattering it in the creek. I lined the crawl with a tarp and a foam pad and left a sealed bottle of water there, then covered it back up. It was tight and miserable. It was also invisible. On day 104, the man who had searched near my entrance before came back. I knew it was him because of how he moved. Careful, deliberate. He did not stomp. He did not talk to himself. He scanned the ground the way a hunter scans. He came with the dog. I watched through the periscope while he moved around the corridor, stopping at odd points, listening. The dog ranged ahead, sniffing. The man called him back often, keeping him close. The man paused near the deadfall cover and crouched again. He did not touch it this time. He looked at it, then looked uphill toward the stump that used to be my main inlet. He started moving uphill. My intake now drew from the secondary stump. The first stump was dead. No faint static trick would work this time because I had sealed that route. The man would find nothing there. That was good. But the dog could still find other clues. The dog could find my creek approach. The dog could find my waste cache if the wind carried scent. I needed them gone. I took a calculated risk. I opened the main entrance from inside, just enough to push out a small object. An empty energy drink can I had kept for this exact purpose tied to a filament line. I fed the line out through a tiny gap under the deadfall cover, then pulled it taut. The can sat 20 feet away from my shelter, hidden under branches, invisible. But when I pulled the line, it rattled against rock and wood, making a bright, unnatural clatter. I pulled it in short bursts, creating the sound, then stopping, then creating it again. Outside, through the periscope, the dog's head snapped toward the sound. The dog pulled against his leash. The man turned instantly, body tensing, hand going to whatever he carried. The dog barked once, sharp. The man hissed at him to quiet down. The dog pulled harder. I pulled the can again, louder. The man backed away from the sound source, scanning the trees. He did not approach it. That told me what I needed to know. He was not a curious hiker. He was someone who had learned that odd sounds mean danger. He yanked the dog back and started moving away fast, not uphill now, but sideways, trying to get distance and a better angle. I stopped pulling. The forest went quiet again. The man did not come back that day. I removed the can line that night during snow and hid it again. Evidence removed. No loose ends. The next month became a waiting game with constant small tasks. I stayed inside more. I reduced outside trips. I stretched water by melting snow inside in a covered pot, then treating it. Melting snow takes fuel, but it reduces exposure. I balanced it. I also started hearing fewer human voices overall. When I did hear humans, the tone had changed. No more family arguments about where to go. No more kids complaining about wet shoes. The voices I heard now were short, harsh, tactical. People calling out positions. People warning each other about danger. People moving in pairs or threes, not long ragged lines. One night, I heard a group pass, and one man said, "No fires, no lights, no talking." That sentence hit me because it mirrored my own rules. It meant other survivors had learned the same lessons. It also meant those survivors might search for hidden shelters because they understood how they worked. On day 140, the shelter almost ended because of simple luck. A tree came down in wind and snapped branches across my entrance deadfall. The impact was not loud enough to sound like a crash through dirt, but it changed the layout. It created a new line, a new pattern. When I crawled out through the service hatch to inspect, I saw that the fallen trunk lay upslope, but its branches draped toward the entrance zone in a way that created a slight arch. An arch draws the eye. An arch looks arranged, even when it is natural. I spent the next 6 hours in freezing wind, cutting and dragging and rearranging the mess until it looked random again. I worked until my hands cramped. I worked until my shoulders ached. I worked because if I left that arch, someone walking the corridor would notice it subconsciously and step closer. Near the end of that work, I heard movement down slope, not voices, footsteps, one person. I froze, saw in my mind how exposed I was, crouched over deadfall with a saw in hand. No time to vanish cleanly. The person came into view between trunks. A woman alone, carrying a pack and a rifle slung low. She moved cautious, scanning. Her face looked hollow with fatigue. She stopped when she saw me. We stared at each other across maybe 30 yards of trees and snow. She raised one hand, palm out, not waving, just showing she was not rushing. I did not raise my hands. I kept the saw down, not lifted, not threatening. I stood slowly, making myself visible in a controlled way, because sudden movement invites sudden decisions. She spoke first, low. "I won't come closer." Her voice was rough, calm, practical, no drama. I answered, keeping my voice low too. "Good." She looked at the deadfall mess, then at my boots, then at my face. She understood immediately that I was doing something deliberate. She did not need to see the entrance panel to know what kind of work this was. She said, "You live under there." I did not confirm. I did not deny. Silence does not stop a smart person from knowing. Silence only stops a smart person from using your own words later. She nodded once, more to herself than to me. "I was following the creek. I saw your prints. You are careful, but not invisible." That stung because it was true. Everything leaves a trace eventually, even careful. She did not threaten me. She did not ask for food. She said, "I'm moving north. There's a place that still has fences, people, rules." I stayed silent. She said, "I'm not recruiting. I'm warning you. People search the tree line now. They search for hidden winter shelters. They bring dogs." I heard myself ask, "How far behind?" She answered without hesitation. 2 days, maybe less. A man with a dog, a small group. He has patience." So it was the same man. She shifted her weight, eyes still on me. "You can stay, or you can move. But if he finds you, he won't leave you alone." I asked, "Why tell me?" She shrugged, small. "I found a cache once, water and socks, no note. I figured whoever left it did not want contact. I respected that. I'm returning the favor." That hit hard because it made my invisible help real. Someone had noticed. Someone had understood the intention. I nodded once. "Thank you." She backed away a step, still calm. "Good luck. Then she turned and moved into the trees, leaving no more words behind. I stood there for a long time, saw in my mind the man with the dog circling back, saw him finding my creek route, saw him watching my entrance until I had to come out for water, saw him waiting me out. The shelter had delayed the world. It had not erased it. That night, I packed. I did not take everything. I took what mattered: food dense enough, water treatment, fire starter, knife, hatchet, spare socks, a compact tarp, the radio, the battery pack, the oxygen monitor, a coil of filament, the first aid kit, my sleeping bag. I left behind heavy cans, extra tools, comfort items. I left behind the bench I built, the little shelf I sanded smooth out of pride, the spare filters that would not fit in my pack. I left behind the shelter itself, which had been my whole focus for months. Before dawn, during light snow, I slipped out through the service hatch with my pack on and moved uphill to the emergency crawl under the boulder pile. I sealed myself into that cramped space, pulled the brush cover back over it, and waited. From there, I could see a slice of the corridor through gaps in rock and branches. I could hear everything. I could also stay hidden without the shelter's entrance becoming the focal point. Midday, the man arrived. He came with the dog and 2 other adults. 1 man, 1 woman. All of them moved cautious, scanning. The dog pulled on the leash, sniffing hard, nose low. The man stopped near the deadfall cover, crouched, and watched it for a long time without touching. He signaled to the others with 2 fingers. The others spread out, not far, just enough to cover angles. The dog sniffed near the entrance zone and whined once. The man tightened the leash and hissed at the dog, then crouched closer. He touched the deadfall carefully this time, moving branches one by one, testing weight, testing pattern. He found the seam. I watched him press his fingers into the edge of the panel and pause. He did not yank, he did not rush. He looked back at his companions, then at the dog, then back at the seam. He whispered something. The woman nodded. The man shifted branches aside and pulled the panel open. Air spilled out. The man leaned in and listened. I stayed still in my boulder crawl, packed tight against my chest, watching. The man crawled partway in, then stopped. He backed out and looked at the others. His face showed a brief flash of satisfaction, not joy, possession. He said, loud enough that I could hear, "It's real." The other man moved closer, peered in. The woman kept watch, scanning the trees. The man with the dog crawled inside again. This time he reached the inner door, the sealed one. He tested it, felt the latch, frowned. He called to the others. The other man handed him something, maybe a pry bar. The man worked at the latch carefully, trying not to splinter wood. He wanted the shelter intact. I watched him spend 20 minutes on it. He finally got it open. He disappeared inside. The dog stayed outside, whining, pulling toward the entrance. The man inside started talking, voice muffled. He called out inventory. He sounded pleased. He sounded angry too, maybe at the idea that someone had lived there alone with all that food while the world starved. The other man crawled in after him. The woman stayed outside, rifle up, eyes scanning. That was my last look at the shelter as mine. I did not rush down to fight. I did not shout. I did not beg. I did not threaten. Those moves belonged to people who still believed possession could be negotiated in a collapsing world. Instead, I waited until the woman turned her head away to scan the ridge. Then I slid out of my boulder crawl and moved uphill, staying behind rocks, moving in snow that erased my steps quickly. I did not look back until I reached a higher shelf of trees where I could see the corridor far below. I saw no movement that suggested they had noticed me. They were focused on the shelter. I kept moving north. The mountain route was hard. Snow deepened. Wind cut stronger, but the infected movement was slower in the cold, and human traffic was lighter up here. That was the trade. I walked until dusk, then found a hollow under dense fir branches and pitched my tarp low. No straight lines, no obvious shape. I melted snow in my pot with a small flame shielded by my body and treated it, then ate a cold meal to avoid cooking smells. That night, I lay under the tarp listening to the forest and felt something shift in my thinking. I had spent months measuring success by invisibility. I had treated hiding as morality. If I stayed hidden, I stayed alive, and the world's collapse stayed outside. But hiding did not stop the world. It only delayed the moment the world reached into your dirt and took what it wanted. The next morning, I moved again. I followed ridgelines, avoided open bowls, stayed under tree cover. I crossed one frozen creek, then another, careful with weight, using a branch to test thickness before stepping. Near midday, I saw smoke far off, thin, rising from a valley pocket. Human camp, possibly organized, possibly dangerous. I stayed away. In the afternoon, I found one of my old caches, the one I had abandoned earlier, now torn open, scattered. Not by animals. The packaging was ripped and tossed, not chewed. A boot print sat beside it, deep, deliberate. The man with the dog had been following my habits for longer than I realized. He had mapped me. He had earned the shelter the way predators earn prey, through patience and pattern reading. That did not make him smarter than me. It made him willing to spend time on hunting humans. That was a difference in values, not intelligence. I kept moving north, adjusting my own patterns, refusing to leave caches in the same way again. After 3 days, I hit a ridge where the trees opened slightly, and I could see a long stretch of valley. The towns down there were silent. No traffic, no lights, just a few thin smoke columns and a dark smear where something had burned large. I sat behind a rock and ate slowly, chewing without hurry, watching the valley. In that quiet, I thought about the woman who warned me. I thought about the kid with wet shoes. I thought about the dog, hungry and confused, still doing what dogs do, finding people, leading them into new situations. I also thought about my shelter, now occupied by a small group with a dog, probably fighting among themselves already about who deserved what. The shelter would not save them. It would just become the center of their conflict. They would make noise. They would draw attention. Someone else would find them. The cycle would continue. I stood up, tightened my pack, and walked away from the valley view. By the end of the week, I found signs of fencing. Not tall, not perfect, but real. Wire strung between trees, a line of old metal panels, a lookout platform built into a pine. People with rules, the kind of place the woman had described. I did not walk straight in. I watched from a distance for hours. I saw how guards moved. I saw where they posted. I saw how they handled someone approaching from a trail, stopping the person far out, controlling the interaction. When I finally stepped into view with my hands visible and my pack on the ground, a man called out for me to stop, calm and firm. He did not point a gun at my head. He held his weapon low, ready, disciplined. I stopped and waited. The man asked my name. I gave a first name only. He asked where I came from. I said the mountains. He asked if I was sick. I said no. He asked if I had been bitten. I said no. He watched my eyes, my hands, my posture. He asked if I had a weapon. I said yes and pointed to where it was packed, telling him he could take it if he wanted. He nodded and had another guard retrieve it without rushing. He asked why I was here. I told him the truth, in the simplest form. I hid. Someone found my shelter. I moved. He nodded once, not surprised. He said, "Hiding works until it doesn't." He let me stand in the cold while he talked to someone on a handheld radio. Short phrases, controlled. After a few minutes, he told me I could come to the outer gate, not inside, and drink water. He told me they would decide if I stayed. I walked forward slow, hands still visible, and took the offered water without grabbing. I sat on a stump near the gate, pack at my feet, and waited, listening to the sounds of a settlement that still functioned. Quiet footsteps, low voices, someone chopping wood behind a windbreak, a generator running in short bursts, far enough back that it did not broadcast itself to the valley. I realized I had been living in silence so long that normal work sounds felt intense. A woman came out to look at me. Not the one who warned me, a different woman, older, eyes sharp. She asked a few questions, practical ones. What skills I had, what supplies I carried, whether I had seen infected in the last week, how many, what movement speed in the cold. I answered straight. She studied my pack, then said, "You built a shelter?" I hesitated, then said, "I dug one." She asked where. I shook my head, not sharing that. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. Good answer. That night, they let me sleep in an outer shed with a locked door, not comfortable, but safe enough. They kept my weapon. They kept watch. They did not trust me. They also did not kill me for showing up, which was a kind of mercy now. I lay on a rough cot and stared at the ceiling boards, hearing wind outside, hearing the low murmur of guards trading shifts. In the dark, I thought about the whole arc of my plan. Build low, stay quiet, disappear, watch the world pass overhead. It worked for months. It bought me time. It kept me alive. It also turned me into a person who listened to suffering from beneath the ground and measured morality in ounces of trail mix and socks left under logs. I did not regret building the shelter. I regretted believing the shelter could be an ending. It was never an ending. It was a pause. In the morning, the older woman came back and told me the rules. Work assignment, noise discipline, no wandering alone, no secret stashes inside the fence, no bringing strangers in, no lying about bites, ever. I listened and nodded. When she finished, she asked one final question. Why did you leave caches for people you refused to meet? I took a second to answer, because the true answer was messy, and I did not want to dress it up. I said, I wanted to stay hidden. I also didn't want kids dying on my doorstep. She nodded once. That's honest. You'll fit better than most. That afternoon, I worked cutting deadfall into stove lengths in a sheltered yard, keeping the noise contained, stacking wood in neat rows that stayed under a tarp, no visible piles from a distance. My hands moved. My mind stayed present. And for the first time in months, I had to pay attention to other people's movements again, other people's rules, other people's needs. Late in the day, I stood at the fence line and looked back toward the mountains. I could not see my old shelter from here. I could not even see the ridge that held it. Somewhere behind those lines of trees and rock, a hidden place sat under snow, now occupied by strangers, already part of someone else's story. I turned away from the view and walked back into the settlement, focused on the next task, the next rule, the next day. Hiding had kept me alive. It had also taught me a hard truth I could not unlearn. In a collapse, invisibility is temporary. Only discipline lasts. Only patterns matter. The world finds you when your pattern becomes readable. So I started building a new pattern, one day at a time, in a place with fences and watch shifts and rules that made survival boring on purpose.